I was standing in my own hallway, in the dark, holding a laundry basket, when I heard my son say the sentence that ended our family as I knew it. "She'll never know about the trust," he whispered. "By the time she figures it out, it'll already be done." My daughter-in-law laughed, soft and satisfied, the kind of laugh you give when a plan is finally working. "You're sure your mother won't check?" "She's 66, Van. She trusts me. She's never once asked to see the paperwork." I stood there in the dark with a basket of my grandson's pajamas against my hip, and I did the one thing 34 years in a courtroom taught me to do better than anyone else alive. I stayed perfectly still, and I listened, and I did not miss a single word. But the whisper in that hallway was only the opening line. Behind it was a forged signature, a fake medical evaluation, and a plan to quietly strip me of control over $680,000 my husband spent his whole life building for 2 children who don't even know their names are on it yet. My son forgot one thing about his mother. I don't just hear things. I record them. I spent 3 decades making sure that every word spoken in a federal courtroom was captured exactly, punctuation and all, admissible, unimpeachable, forever. And that night, in my own hallway, I turned on the recorder in my head, and I did not turn it off again until the day I made him listen to himself. Welcome back to Gia Mom Stories, where mothers share the nights that tested everything they built, and the quiet discipline that carried them through. If tonight's story sounds like a whisper you've heard in your own house, stay until the end, drop a comment, and subscribe, because this one has a transcript, and transcripts don't lie. My name is Barbara Whitfield. Everyone who matters calls me Bobby. I'm 66 years old, and for 34 years I was a certified federal court reporter at the United States District Courthouse in Columbus, Ohio. If you've never sat in a courtroom, you might not know what that job actually is. I sat below the judge's bench with a steno machine between my knees, and I typed every single word spoken in that room: testimony, objections, sidebars, the judge clearing his throat, the defendant muttering under his breath when he thought no one could hear him. I could. That was the job. Nothing gets missed. Nothing gets softened. Nothing gets left out because it's inconvenient. I typed 220 words a minute at my peak. I have sat 12 feet from murderers, embezzlers, con men who cried real tears in front of a jury and meant none of it. I learned to tell the difference between a true pause and a rehearsed one. I learned that liars almost always over-explain, and honest people usually just say the thing and stop. I retired 4 years ago with a pension, a good hip replacement, and a habit I never lost. I still hear a sentence and want to type it. My daughter-in-law thinks it's a quirk, an old woman's tic, the way I sometimes go quiet mid-conversation like I'm somewhere else. I'm not somewhere else. I'm transcribing. I have been transcribing my whole life, and the night I heard my son whisper about a trust he thought I'd never find, I transcribed that too. Word for word. In my head, then on paper, then, eventually, on tape. Let me tell you about Walter first, because none of this makes sense without him. Walter Whitfield married me when I was 24 and he was 27. 40 years together before the heart attack took him in his workshop on a Tuesday afternoon, sawdust still on his hands. Walter was a cabinet maker, the kind who measured twice and cut once and never once in 40 years handed a customer a piece of furniture with a wobble in it. He started with a rented garage on 5th Street and a table saw he'd paid off in installments. By the time he retired, Whitfield Custom Woodworking had 11 employees and a waiting list 8 months long. People drove from 3 states over for one of Walter's dining tables. He built things to outlast the people who ordered them, and he used to say that about everything, not just furniture. Anything worth building is worth building so it outlives you, Bobby. That's the whole point of building. Walter didn't spend money on things that announced themselves. He drove the same pickup truck for 16 years. He wore a canvas apron until it had more patches than original fabric. But every quarter, without fail, for almost 30 years, he took a portion of the shop's profit and moved it into an account he barely spoke about. He called it the someday account when our son Derek was small. Later, after Derek married and our first grandchild came, Walter sat me down at our kitchen table with a legal pad and said, "Bobby, I want to make this real. Not someday anymore. Now." We met with an estate attorney named Howard Reyes, a careful, precise man Walter trusted because Howard never rounded numbers and never rushed a signature. Together they built an irrevocable trust. The Whitfield Grandchildren's Legacy Trust. Funded with proceeds from the eventual sale of the business, Walter's life insurance, and a chunk of our joint savings. The final number, after Walter passed and the business sold to his longtime foreman, came to $680,000. The terms were simple and completely intentional. I was named sole trustee for as long as I was living incompetent. The funds were earmarked for our grandchildren's education and, after that, a first home, released only when each child turned 25, or earlier only for documented tuition, only with trustee approval, only with paperwork. Walter built in every safeguard a careful man could think of, because Walter had grown up poor in a house where an uncle borrowed his grandmother's savings and never paid a cent back. He told me once, sanding a table leg in his shop, "Money left unprotected doesn't help anybody, Bobby. It just finds the nearest hand that wants it." He never got to meet our grandchildren fully. Lily was 2 when he died. Owen wasn't born yet. But he built that trust for them anyway, the way he built everything, so it would outlast him. And for 6 years, I have guarded it exactly the way he asked me to. Quarterly statements from the trust bank, reviewed line by line the day they arrived. Every request for a distribution documented, receipted, filed. I have never once, not one time, allowed a dollar out of that account without a paper trail a federal judge could follow blind. I want you to remember that number. $680,000. Because by the time this story is over, you'll understand exactly how close my son and his wife came to taking every cent of it without me ever knowing it happened. Derek is my only child. 38 years old, a medical device sales rep, good at his job, personable, the kind of man who remembers your kid's name and your anniversary. He was an easy child. Honor roll, Eagle Scout, the boy who called on Sundays even after he moved out. Walter adored him. I adored him. I still do, which is precisely why the next part of this story hurts the way it does. Derek married Vanessa Cole 7 years ago. A small wedding at a vineyard outside Dayton, string lights, a band that played too loud. I liked Vanessa in those early years, or told myself I did. She's sharp, quick with numbers, worked for years as a regional manager at a mid-sized bank before she left to focus on the kids. She has a way of tilting a conversation so that whatever she wants ends up sounding like your idea. I noticed that early. I told myself it was just confidence. Court reporters see a lot of confident people. Not all of them are honest. I should have paid closer attention to which kind Vanessa was. I want to explain Vanessa a little more fully, because I don't believe in flattening people into a single note, even people who have hurt me. Vanessa grew up the youngest of 3 in a house outside Cincinnati where money came and went in waves depending on which of her father's business ventures was working that year. A carpet outlet, a used car lot, a short-lived franchise selling water filtration systems door to door. Some years there was a family vacation to Florida. Other years the power got shut off for a week and nobody talked about it at school. Her older brother Chase was the one who always had a plan, even as a teenager, always the one explaining to their parents how a new investment would fix everything this time. Vanessa told me once, early in her marriage to Derek, back when she still told me things, that she grew up believing money wasn't something you earned slowly. It was something you positioned yourself for correctly, at the right moment, with the right person standing next to you. She married a steady man with a steady job and a mother-in-law who had, in her eyes, more sitting quietly in an account than anyone in her own family had ever seen at once. I don't say that to excuse what she did. I say it because understanding why a person reaches for something helps you see exactly how far they're willing to reach, and Vanessa, raised on the idea that stability was always one clever move away from disappearing again, was exactly the kind of person her brother knew how to convince. Vanessa's brother, Chase Cole, is a licensed financial advisor in Cincinnati, the kind who wears a slightly too shiny watch and talks about leverage at Thanksgiving dinner like it's a personality trait. I'll come back to Chase, because Chase is not a bystander in this story. Chase is the architect. 2 years ago, Derek came to me with an idea. He wanted to open a second location for the medical device distribution side business he'd started on the side, a small warehouse operation supplying regional clinics. He needed capital, somewhere between $100,000 and $150,000. He asked if I'd consider an early distribution from the trust, just this once, just a loan against Lily's future share. He'd pay it back with interest. I said no. Gently, but completely. Derek, I told him, that money isn't mine to lend and it isn't yours to borrow. Your father built it so it would still be standing when Lily and Owen are grown, no matter what happens to any of us in between. I'm not going to be the one who takes a chip out of that foundation, even for you. Especially for you. Derek said he understood. He hugged me. He told me I was right, that Dad would have said the same thing. I believed him completely. I found out much later that he went home that night and told Vanessa something very different. But I'm getting ahead of myself, the way I never let myself do in a transcript. Everything in order. Everything on the record. 18 months ago is when the small things started. I want to walk you through them the way I walked through them at the time, because at the IRS they'd call this establishing a pattern, and at the courthouse we called it laying foundation, and either way, it means the same thing. You don't act on one strange moment. You wait, and you watch, and you write it down, and eventually the moments stop looking random and start looking like a plan. First, Derek began stopping by more often on weekday afternoons, always when I was alone, always with some small errand as the excuse. Could he borrow the ladder? Did I still have Dad's old tool chest? He'd stay for coffee and, almost every visit, he'd ask casual little questions that weren't really casual at all. Mom, do you still keep all the trust paperwork here at the house, or is it at the bank? Mom, remind me who the successor trustee is if something happened to you? Mom, have you ever thought about simplifying things, maybe adding a co-trustee so it's not all on you? I answered honestly every time, because I had no reason not to. Howard Reyes is named as successor trustee if I become incapacitated or pass away. The original documents are in a fireproof box in my study and copies sit in Howard's office safe. No, I had never considered a co-trustee, because Walter and I had discussed that specifically and decided against it. Walter didn't want 2 sets of hands on that money. He wanted 1 set of hands he trusted completely. Mine. I noted, quietly, that Derek seemed disappointed by that last answer. Just a flicker. A court reporter learns to catch flickers. Witnesses give you a whole face full of information in the half-second before they compose themselves for the record. Second thing. Vanessa started commenting on my memory. Small, breezy little comments, dropped into conversation like nothing. Bobby, didn't you already tell me that story last week? Bobby, Are you sure you took your blood pressure pill? You seem a little foggy today. Bobby, you left the stove on again, didn't you? Derek mentioned it. I had never once left the stove on. I checked. I always check. 34 years of transcribing testimony teaches you to notice exactly what you did and did not do, because in a courtroom, what you think you remember and what actually happened are two very different things, and only one of them holds up. I wrote the comments down anyway, dates and all, in a small spiral notebook I kept in my nightstand. Not because I suspected anything yet. Because it's a habit. A reporter documents. That's what we do instead of worrying. Third thing, and this is the one that made the spiral notebook start to feel less like a habit and more like a case file. 9 months ago, I went to see my primary care doctor, Dr. Amara Osei, for a routine checkup. Nothing was wrong with me. Blood work fine, blood pressure fine, the usual 66-year-old aches. But Dr. Osei mentioned, almost in passing, that she'd received a call the week before from my son, asking whether there had been any concerning changes in my recent labs, whether I'd shown any signs of cognitive decline during my visits. I sat very still in that paper gown on that exam table, the way I used to sit very still on the witness stand's edge of my seat, 12 feet from a lie in progress, and I asked Dr. Osei to repeat exactly what she'd told him. She said she'd told him there was nothing in my chart to indicate any decline whatsoever, that my cognition was, in her words, sharp as a tack, and that she'd found the question a little unusual coming out of nowhere. I thanked her. I drove home. And in my kitchen, at the same table where Walter once laid out a legal pad and said let's make this real, I opened my spiral notebook and I wrote a new heading at the top of a fresh page. Case file. Derek and Vanessa Whitfield. Subject, pattern of concern regarding trust and competency. I want to pause here, because I know some of you watching have already lived a version of this. If you've ever had a family member start asking casual little questions about your memory, your paperwork, your finances, questions dressed up as concern that felt just slightly off in a way you couldn't name yet, comment below, because you'll understand exactly why what I did next wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. Subscribe, because this is where it starts moving fast. 6 months ago, I hired a document specialist. Not a private investigator, nothing dramatic. A retired paralegal named Ruth Calloway who used to work with Howard Reyes on estate matters and now does independent consulting for families who suspect financial exploitation of an elderly relative. Ruth is 71, sharper than most people half her age, and she does not waste a word. I liked her immediately. I told Ruth everything. The loan request Derek made and I refused. The stove comments. The memory comments. The call to my doctor. Ruth listened the way I used to listen to testimony, without interrupting, without reacting, just absorbing every detail in order. When I finished, Ruth said, "Bobby, I'm going to tell you what this looks like from the outside, and I want you to hear it plainly. This looks like the early stages of someone building a paper case for guardianship or conservatorship. They're planting seeds with your doctor, with anyone who might later be asked, was Mrs. Whitfield showing signs? If they can get 2 or 3 professionals on record saying they'd noticed concerns, even small ones, even ones a doctor already contradicted, that becomes ammunition in a courtroom. You of all people know how much weight a paper trail carries, even a manufactured one, if nobody's there to correct it in real time." I asked her what we should do. Ruth leaned back in her chair, the same chair she'd sat in for 20 years advising families through exactly this kind of quiet, creeping betrayal, and she told me something I have carried with me ever since. "Bobby, in this work, the families who lose everything are almost never the ones who get blindsided. They're the ones who noticed something small, felt uneasy about it, and talked themselves out of the feeling because the person doing it was someone they loved. You didn't do that. You wrote it down instead. That instinct alone puts you ahead of 90% of the cases that come across my desk too late to fix. Document everything, Ruth said. The way you already have been. And we watch for the actual move. Talk is one thing. An actual attempt to touch the trust, that's when this becomes something we can act on. I didn't have to wait long. 4 months ago, I received a call from the Trust's bank, Heartland Fiduciary Group, from a relationship manager named Eleanor, whom I've worked with for 6 years, ever since the trust was funded. Priya called to confirm receipt of a signed request I had allegedly submitted, asking to add a co-trustee to the account. I told her I had submitted no such request. There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause I used to catch in 100 depositions, the sound of someone recalculating what they thought they knew. Priya said the request had come in by mail 2 days earlier, on what appeared to be my letterhead, with what appeared to be my signature, requesting that Derek Whitfield be added as co-trustee with full authority, citing, in the cover letter, my own stated wish to, quote, ease the burden of sole trusteeship given some recent memory difficulties. I asked Priya to please not process anything, and to please save every physical piece of that submission exactly as it arrived. I told her I would be filing a fraud report and that Heartland's own compliance department would want a record showing the bank had done everything correctly. Priya, God bless her, is a careful woman. She had already flagged the signature herself before I even called, because in 6 years I had never once signed anything for that account without also emailing her a heads-up beforehand, a habit she'd come to expect from me, and this letter had arrived cold with no warning at all. Small deviations. That's always where the truth hides. My son didn't know that his mother has trained an entire bank employee, without ever meaning to notice exactly the kind of anomaly he was about to create. I drove straight to Ruth Calloway's office with the case file under my arm. Now we have something, Ruth said, laying the forged letter next to a real signature sample of mine that Howard Reyes had on file from years back. She pulled out a jeweler's loupe, an actual magnifying tool, and went line by line. Look at your B, Bobby. Yours starts with a loop that closes tight, always, every single time. 30 years of signing exhibits will do that to a hand. This B doesn't close. It's close enough to fool someone glancing at it fast, but it's not you. Whoever forged this either practiced from an old check or a card, or they traced it. Either way, this is a criminal matter now, not a family disagreement. I asked Ruth to hold everything, to not go to the police yet, and she understood immediately. Because Ruth, like me, believes in complete cases, not partial ones. At the IRS they never close a file at 31 findings when they suspect 47. I wasn't closing this one at a single forged letter when I suspected there was a whole plan sitting behind it. I want to tell you about Chase Cole now, Vanessa's brother, the financial advisor with the shiny watch, because Ruth's next move was to pull the thread on him, and what she found explained everything. 3 months ago, Ruth, working within entirely legal bounds, public records, and information Vanessa herself had left visible on a shared family cloud account that Derek, in an unrelated moment of carelessness, had once used to back up old family tax documents and never properly locked down, found a series of emails between Vanessa and Chase. I want to be careful here and tell you plainly, we did not hack anything. We did not access anything password protected that wasn't already exposed through Derek's own sloppy sharing settings, which Ruth confirmed with a technology consultant before she ever looked at a single message, because Ruth Calloway does not build a case on evidence a defense attorney could throw out in the first 5 minutes. What those emails showed, laid out over 6 months of correspondence, was this. Chase Cole had drafted, essentially, a business plan for taking control of my trust. Step 1. Establish a documented pattern of concern about my memory, using casual comments to family, to my doctor's office, to anyone who might later be interviewed, so that a competency question would look organic rather than manufactured. Step 2. Submit a request to add Derek as co-trustee, using a forged signature copied from an old anniversary card Derek still had, banking on the likelihood that a busy fiduciary office might process routine paperwork without excessive scrutiny, especially paperwork that arrived with a cover letter citing my own supposed wishes. Step 3. Once Derek held co-trustee status, begin systematically approving distributions, framed as tuition prepayments or education expenses for Lily and Owen, that would actually route into a shell LLC Chase had already registered, called Cole Whitfield Ventures, ostensibly for the medical device warehouse expansion Derek had asked me to fund 2 years earlier and which I had refused. The email that stopped my heart, and I mean that plainly, was one Chase sent to Vanessa 4 months ago. It read, in part, once he's co-trustee, we don't need her sign-off anymore for anything under $50K. That's the trust language. He showed me the docs. We drip it out in chunks under the radar. She'll never know about the trust, not the real numbers anyway, not until it's already moved. There it was. The exact phrase. Not spoken in my hallway yet, not for another 2 months, but already written down, already agreed to, already a plan with a paper trail of its own. Ruth printed every email, dated, sourced, screenshotted with metadata intact so nothing could be dismissed as fabricated later. She added it to the file behind the forged letter, behind the loop analysis, behind 6 months of my spiral notebook entries. The case was no longer a suspicion. It was a stack of paper thick enough to end a marriage and, quite possibly, put 2 people in front of a judge. I still didn't act. Ruth and I agreed, the same way I used to sit on a verdict I could already feel coming in a courtroom, that we needed the final piece. Not what they'd planned. What they'd actually said to each other, in their own voices, believing no one was listening. Because a jury, or in my case a family, believes a document. But nothing lands the way a person's own voice landing in their own ears lands. I had 34 years of proof of that. 2 months ago, I set the trap, and I want to walk you through it carefully, because it wasn't complicated. It was patient. I told Derek and Vanessa that my hip had been bothering me again, which was true, and that Dr. Osei had suggested I take it easier in the evenings, sit rather than stand, rest more. I mentioned, almost as an aside over a phone call with Derek, that I'd taken to falling asleep in my recliner most nights around 9 while the television played, that I barely made it upstairs to my own bed some evenings. I said it exactly once, casually, the way you plant one seed and walk away from it. Derek started coming by more, always in the evening, always with Vanessa, always with some soft, plausible reason. Checking on me. Bringing dinner. Dropping off Lily's school pictures. For 6 evenings running, nothing happened beyond ordinary visits. I sat in my recliner most of those nights, a book in my lap, my breathing slow, my eyes closed by 9:15, and I listened to 2 people quietly clean my kitchen, lower the television volume so as not to wake me, and leave without incident. I want you to understand something about patience, because it is the entire backbone of my profession. I have sat in a witness chair's shadow for 6 hours waiting for one true sentence in an 8-hour deposition. One evening, or 6 evenings, on my own recliner, cost me nothing at all. The 7th night was different. It was a Tuesday. Derek came alone that time, said Vanessa was putting the kids down and would join him later. He let himself in with his own key, the way he'd always had one, the way I'd never once thought to take it back because he was my son and I trusted him completely, right up until the exact moment I stopped. I heard him move through the kitchen. I heard the specific creak of the 3rd stair, the one that's needed fixing for years and that Walter always meant to get to. I heard him walk down the hallway toward my study, not toward the living room where I sat, breathing slow, a laundry basket of Lily and Owen's overnight pajamas, the ones they keep at my house for sleepovers, resting against my hip because I'd been folding them when I first heard the stair creak and simply frozen, mid-fold, and let my eyes close instead. I heard my study door open. I heard the specific sound of the fireproof box, the one that holds the original trust documents, being lifted from the closet shelf. I heard the combination lock turn, 3 clicks, the same combination Walter had chosen the year Derek was born, a fact I had never once considered dangerous until that exact second, because my son knew that combination the way he knew his own birthday, because it was his own birthday. Then I heard the front door open again, softer footsteps this time, Vanessa's, and her whisper carried down the hallway the way whispers always carry further than people think, because a whisper strips away every polite inflection a person uses to soften a sentence, and what's left underneath is just the plan, bare and exact. Did you get it? Getting it now. Photographing the whole trust doc and the successor clause. Chase says once we've got the exact trustee language we can finalize the letter to Heartland this week. And your mom's asleep? Out cold. She's been out by 9 every night for a week. Doctor's got her on something for her hip, I think it knocks her out early. A pause, papers shifting. She'll never know about the trust. By the time she figures it out, it'll already be done. And Vanessa laughed. Soft. Satisfied. I stood in my own hallway holding a laundry basket, and I did not move, and I did not breathe any differently than I had the moment before, and inside my head, the machine that had typed 220 words a minute for 34 years switched itself on without my even asking it to, and it began, quietly, perfectly, to transcribe. Question: did you get it? A. Getting it now. I have never in my life wanted so badly to slam a door. I did not slam a door. I stood there until I heard the fireproof box close, the lock spin back to 0, the study door click shut, my son's footsteps and my daughter-in-law's footsteps retreat down the hallway and out my front door, into the driveway, into their car, away. Then I set down the laundry basket, very gently, on the hallway table, the same table where Walter used to drop his truck keys every evening for 40 years, and I walked into my study, and I sat down at my own desk, and for the first time since Walter died, I let myself cry. Not for long. A court reporter doesn't have the luxury of long. I gave it maybe 4 minutes, and then I opened my spiral notebook to a fresh page, and I wrote down every word I had just heard, in order, exactly as spoken, the way I have written down every word anyone has ever said in front of me for 34 years. Then I called Ruth Calloway. It was 10:40 at night. She picked up on the second ring, because Ruth Calloway is the kind of woman who answers her phone at 10:40 at night when the call is from a client mid-investigation. He said it, I told her. Word for word, Ruth. She'll never know about the trust. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said the thing I needed to hear. Bobby, we're done gathering. Now we finish it. If you've ever stood somewhere in your own home, in the dark, and heard someone you raised say something about you that wasn't meant for your ears, you already know the particular kind of stillness that follows. Stay with me, because the transcript wasn't finished yet, and neither was I. Drop a comment if a whisper has ever told you more truth than a person ever would to your face, and subscribe, because the confrontation is coming. The next morning, I called Howard Ray as first, because Howard, as successor trustee and as the man who drafted every page of that document with Walter sitting across from him, needed to know before anyone else that his signature clause had nearly been used against the very person it was written to protect. Howard read through Ruth's file in his office, glasses pushed up on his forehead, not saying a word for almost 20 minutes, the way judges sometimes go silent right before they rule against somebody. When he finished, he set the papers down flat and said, Bobby, I have drafted over 400 trusts in my career. I have never once seen a family member forge a fiduciary signature to strip her of authority while she's still alive and, might I add, entirely competent. This isn't a family disagreement. This is attempted fraud, forgery, and depending on how a prosecutor wants to charge it, potentially elder financial exploitation, even though you're the one who caught it before it could take a single dollar. I asked him what my options were. Full legal options, Howard said. You can refer this to the county prosecutor's financial crimes unit today, and given the forged letter alone, they'd likely take it seriously. You can pursue civil action against Chase Cole specifically for facilitating fraud through his advisory license, which the Ohio Division of Securities would also want to know about. Or, he paused, the way careful men pause before offering the harder, more human option, you can handle this the way you're clearly built to handle things, Bobby. Put it all in front of them. Every page. Let them hear their own voices. And then decide, as the person this money actually belongs to protecting, what mercy, if any, looks like. I told Howard I wanted both roads open. I wanted the legal referral prepared and ready to file the same day, sitting loaded, and I wanted one evening, one dinner, where my son and his wife would sit across my own table and listen to a transcript of themselves. Ruth spent the next 10 days finalizing the file. Not because it needed more evidence. Because a case this size deserves to be presented once, completely, without a single gap a clever lawyer or a defensive spouse could slip through later. Here's what the final file contained, and I want to list it plainly because that's exactly how I laid it out on my own dining table when the night finally came. Tab 1. My spiral notebook, 18 months of dated entries, every strange comment about my memory, every unusual question about the trust, every call Derek made asking about co-trustees and successor language, transcribed the way I transcribe everything, in order, without embellishment. Tab 2. The forged letter to Heartland Fiduciary, side by side with a genuine signature sample, Ruth's loop analysis printed and annotated, the specific letter B that didn't close the way mine has closed for 30 years. Tab 3. Dr. Osei's written statement, requested formally through Ruth, confirming Derek's phone call asking about my cognitive decline, and confirming that she had told him plainly there was none. Tab 4. Chase Cole's emails to Vanessa, 6 months of correspondence, dated and sourced, laying out the entire plan in his own words, ending with the sentence that would become the title of this very story, written 2 months before he ever said it out loud in my hallway. She'll never know about the trust, not the real numbers anyway, not until it's already moved. Tab 5, the last tab, the one Ruth and I built specifically from that Tuesday night. An audio recording. I want to explain this clearly and honestly, because I know some of you are wondering. After the first time I overheard them, I did something I should have done from the very beginning of this investigation. I placed a small voice-activated recorder, the kind sold openly at any electronics store, on the bookshelf in my own study, in my own home, where I have every legal right in the state of Ohio to record a conversation happening inside my own house, a fact Howard confirmed in writing before I ever pressed record a second time. 3 nights later, Derek and Vanessa came back, again believing me asleep, again photographing pages from the fireproof box, again discussing the plan to finalize the forged co-trustee letter that week. This time, the recorder caught every word, clean, timestamped, admissible. 41 pages, total. Bound, tabbed, a table of contents on the front page, because that is simply how I have organized every important document of my entire professional life, and I was not about to stop for the most important one. Before I go any further, I need to tell you about Marion Petrakis, because Marion is the reason that dinner went the way it did instead of collapsing into 2 hours of shouting that would have accomplished nothing. Marion and I met 30 years ago in the courthouse cafeteria, back when she was a probate judge's clerk 2 floors above my own courtroom, and we've been close ever since, close enough that she was at Walter's funeral in the front pew beside me, close enough that she still calls every Sunday just to check in, out of habit more than obligation now. Marion retired from the county probate court 4 years before I retired from federal, and in her 31 years there she watched more families come apart over money left unprotected than she can count. She has a particular gift, one I have always envied a little, for sitting perfectly still in a room where something terrible is being said and never once letting her face give away what she already knows is coming next. I called Marion the week after I overheard Derek and Vanessa in my hallway, and I told her everything, start to finish, the same order I've told you. Marion listened the entire time without interrupting, the way she always has, and when I finished she said only, "Bobby, you built a stronger case in 18 months of noticing than most attorneys build in a year of discovery. What do you need from me?" I told her I needed a witness. Not an attorney, not a relative, someone outside the family entirely who could sit at that table when I finally laid the file out, someone whose presence alone would tell Derek and Vanessa that this was no longer a private matter they could manage with an apology and a hug. Someone who would remember exactly what was said, in case memory ever became a question again for anyone at that table. "You know I'll be there," Marion said. "I've sat through worse hearings than whatever's about to happen at your dining room table. And Bobby, for what it's worth, I think Walter would tell you exactly what I'm about to tell you. You didn't do anything wrong by protecting what he built. Somebody had to be the one who checked. It was always going to be you." I invited them to dinner on a Sunday. Pot roast, because some conversations deserve the smell of a home cooking around them, the same way Walter always said a hard truth lands easier next to something warm on the stove. I set the table with our good plates, the ones from our 40th anniversary that Walter never got to use for our 41st. I put Lily and Owen's booster seats out too, because I wanted them there for dinner, fed and happy, before the real conversation began, and Derek dropped them off early with a babysitter arrangement so the adults could talk. I want you to know I made sure those children were 3 towns over at a trusted sitter's house by the time dinner service ended and dessert never came. We ate. Small talk moved around that table the way it always does right before it stops moving altogether. Derek asked about my hip. Vanessa mentioned Lily's spelling test. I answered every question warmly, because I meant every word of warmth I gave them, even that night, even knowing what I knew, because loving someone and holding them accountable have never once been opposite things in my life. I learned that from Walter. You can love a man and still make him measure twice. When the plates were cleared, I did not offer dessert. I set my hands flat on the table, the way I used to set my hands flat on my steno machine right before a witness said something that would change the whole shape of a case, and I said, "I'd like to share something before we finish tonight." Derek smiled, said something like, "A speech, Mom?" "Something like that," I said. I reached beside my chair, where a 41-page bound file had been sitting the entire meal, close enough to touch, close enough that I'd felt its presence through every bite of pot roast, the same way you feel a verdict sitting in your chest before it's read aloud. I placed the file on the table, right beside the empty roast platter. 2 things I'd served that night. Only one of them had an expiration date. "Derek, Vanessa, 3 weeks ago, I overheard the 2 of you in my hallway. I was sitting in my recliner, and you believed I was asleep. You were not the first time I'd overheard something in my own home, and after that first night, I made a decision. I decided to document it, the same way I have documented testimony for 34 years, because I have learned that memory fades and feelings shift, but a transcript does not." Derek's smile was already gone. Vanessa's hand had gone still on her water glass. I opened the file to tab 1. 18 months of notes, starting with the first time you asked me about adding a co-trustee to your father's trust, and every strange comment about my memory that followed it. I read 3 entries aloud, dates, exact phrasing, the stove comment, the fogginess comment, the co-trustee question asked 4 separate times across 4 separate months. I wrote every one of these down the day they happened, because in my old profession we call this establishing a pattern. I turned to tab 2. This is a letter Heartland fiduciary received 4 months ago, requesting Derek be added as co-trustee to your father's trust. It carries what appears to be my signature. I set the genuine sample beside it. It is not my signature. My B closes. This one doesn't. A document examiner confirmed that in writing. Vanessa said, very quietly, "Derek." "I'm not finished," I said, the same level cadence I used to keep for 6 straight hours of testimony without ever raising my voice, because raising your voice is what people do when the facts alone aren't doing the work, and my facts were doing plenty of work that night. Tab 3. This is a written statement from Dr. Osei, confirming that Derek called her office asking whether there had been any concerning changes in my cognition. There were none. She told him so directly. He asked anyway, and he asked in a way designed to be remembered later, in case anyone needed a professional on record. Derek's jaw had gone tight the exact way Walter's used to when a customer tried to talk him down on a price he knew was fair. Tab 4. This is a series of emails between Vanessa and her brother, Chase Cole. I watched Vanessa's face go the color of the tablecloth. 6 months of planning, laid out step by step. Establish a pattern of concern about my competency. Forge a co-trustee letter. Once Derek holds co-trustee status, begin approving distributions routed into a company Chase already registered called Cole Whitfield Ventures. I looked directly at my daughter-in-law for the first time all evening. Your brother wrote this sentence 4 months ago, Vanessa, and I'm going to read it exactly as he wrote it. She'll never know about the trust, not the real numbers anyway, not until it's already moved. The table had gone the kind of silent that has weight to it, the silence right after a jury foreman stands up and the judge says, on the count of, and everyone in the room stops breathing at once. Marion had not said a single word since I opened the file. She sat with her hands folded, her tea long since gone cold, watching the way she used to watch a courtroom from the clerk's bench, absorbing everything, giving away nothing. Vanessa turned to her once, almost pleading, the way people turn to an unfamiliar face in a room hoping to find an ally who hasn't already made up her mind. You're just a friend of Bobby's, Vanessa said, her voice climbing toward something close to panic. You don't need to be part of this. I retired after 31 years in probate court, Marian said quietly, the first and only thing she said all evening. I've seen exactly what's on that table more times than I can count. I'm not here to judge you, Vanessa. I'm here so that whatever gets said tonight gets remembered accurately by someone who has no reason to remember it anyway but the true one. She picked her tea back up, and that was all. She didn't need to say another word for the rest of the night. Her stillness alone did more work than a lecture ever could have. Derek finally spoke, his voice smaller than I had heard it since he was a boy afraid of a thunderstorm. Mom, how long have you known? I heard the exact phrase 3 weeks ago, standing in my own hallway with a laundry basket. I have suspected something was wrong for 18 months. And Derek, I said, and here my voice did change, just slightly, the only time it did all night. I want you to hear this next part clearly, because it's the part that matters most to me. I recorded you. Both of you. In my own home, which I am legally entitled to do, on the 2 evenings you came back after that first overheard conversation, believing I was asleep, going through your father's fireproof box, photographing the trust documents, finalizing your plan. I pressed play on my phone. It was set on the table between the roast platter and the file, and my son's own voice filled my dining room, clear, unhurried, entirely his own. Getting it now. Photographing the whole trust doc and the successor clause. She's been out by 9 every night for a week. She'll never know about the trust. By the time she figures it out, it'll already be done. Then Vanessa's laugh. Soft. Satisfied. Playing back in the very room she'd set it in. I let it run the full 11 seconds. Then I pressed stop. Vanessa was crying now, the fast kind of tears that come from panic more than remorse, and I have sat close enough to that kind of tears for 34 years to know precisely which one I was looking at. Bobby, please, you don't understand what Chase was actually proposing. It wasn't going to hurt the kids, it was just going to help Derek's business get off the ground faster. We were always going to pay it back. You were going to pay back money you took without my knowledge from an account you had no legal right to touch, using a forged signature, based on a fabricated story about my mind, told to my own doctor. I kept my hands flat on the table. I don't need you to explain the plan to me, Vanessa. I have it in 41 pages. What I need is for the two of you to understand exactly how close you came to a felony, because forging a fiduciary document and defrauding a trust is not a family misunderstanding in the state of Ohio. It's a criminal offense. Howard Reyes has already prepared a referral to the county prosecutor's financial crimes unit. It is sitting, complete, ready to file, in his office right now. Derek's face had gone the color of old paper. Mom, are you going to press charges? I let that question sit exactly as long as it needed to sit, the way I used to let a difficult question hang in a courtroom until every person present understood its full weight before anyone dared answer it. I haven't decided, I said. That's the truth, and I owe you the truth even tonight. What I have decided, effective immediately, is this. Your key to my house is no longer valid. I had the locks changed Wednesday. The combination to your father's fireproof box has been reset, and only Howard and I know the new one. I am filing a formal complaint with the Ohio Division of Securities against Chase Cole's advisory license, because a man who uses his professional credentials to help defraud an elderly woman's trust should not be allowed to keep those credentials, and that referral has nothing to do with mercy, because Chase Cole is not my son and he does not get the benefit of my hesitation. I turned to Vanessa. As for you, I am giving Howard instructions this week to formally document, in writing, witnessed and notarized, that any future involvement in this trust's administration by anyone other than myself and my named successor trustee is permanently barred. Not reconsidered in 5 years. Not revisited if circumstances change. Permanently. Your father-in-law built that account so it could never be reached by the nearest convenient hand, Vanessa, and I intend to honor exactly what he built. Then I looked at my son, and this was the part of the evening I had rehearsed the least, because I did not know, until the words were actually leaving me, exactly how much I would say. Derek, you are my son and I love you exactly as much tonight as I did yesterday morning before I knew any of this. But I need you to sit with what I heard in my own hallway. Not the plan. The specific words. She'll never know. You didn't say your mother wouldn't mind, or your mother would understand if she saw the whole picture. You said she'll never know, because some part of you already understood that if I did know, I would say no, exactly the way I said no 2 years ago when you first asked me directly. You didn't come back to ask again. You came back to make sure you never had to ask at all. Derek put his head in his hands. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He just sat there, elbows on the table, and for a long moment the only sound in that dining room was the refrigerator humming in the kitchen the way it has hummed through every serious conversation that's ever happened in this house. I don't have an excuse, he finally said, quietly, into his own hands. Chase made it sound so clean. Just a technicality, he said, just paperwork, you'd never even feel it happen. And I wanted the warehouse so badly, Mom, I wanted to build something the way Dad built something, and I told myself if it worked, I'd tell you eventually, once it was already growing, once you could see it was fine. Your father built what he built one board at a time, in the open, with his name on the door of his own shop, I said. Not through a shell company registered by your wife's brother, and not through a signature that wasn't his to sign. Nobody spoke for a while after that. Vanessa had stopped crying, or had simply run out of the performance of it, and was staring at the tablecloth the way I've watched 100 witnesses stare at their own hands right after the evidence stops leaving them anywhere else to look. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened in the weeks that followed, because I think it's the most important thing in this whole story. I did not do any of this because I enjoy consequences. I built that file the exact same way I built a career, patiently, completely, without a single gap, because the money at the center of it was never mine to protect carelessly. It was Walter's last board, cut and measured and set in place so it would still be standing for 2 children long after both their grandparents are gone. I was never going to let it be taken apart quietly in my own hallway while I was asleep, or pretending to be. If you've ever had to choose between protecting someone you love and protecting the thing that same person tried to take, stay with me, because the story isn't finished, and neither was that dinner table. Drop a comment if you've ever had to be the one who held the line nobody else in the family was willing to hold, and subscribe, because what happened over the following months is the part that actually matters. Here is how it settled, in the weeks and months after that Sunday dinner, because I know you want the outcome and not just the feeling. Howard Reyes filed the referral with the county prosecutor's financial crimes unit 2 days later, exactly as promised, because a threat you don't follow through on isn't a boundary, it's just a bluff, and I have spent too many years around courtrooms to build my life on bluffs. The prosecutor's office reviewed the forged letter, the document examiner's findings, and the emails, and ultimately offered Derek a deferred prosecution arrangement given his lack of any prior record and the fact that no money had actually been moved before I intervened. He completed 100 hours of community service and 2 years of financial counseling monitoring, and the forgery charge will be expunged from his record if he completes the full term without incident. He is, as of this recording, 6 months into that term, and so far, he has completed every hour on schedule, without a single missed appointment, which I note the exact same way I would note it in a transcript, without embellishment, because that's simply what happened. Chase Cole was not offered the same leniency, because Chase was not my son and I felt no obligation to extend him 1 ounce of the mercy I was still working to find for Derek. The Ohio Division of Securities opened a formal investigation into his conduct based on the email trail, and 6 weeks ago his advisory license was suspended pending a full hearing. He is, last I heard through Vanessa, working in his father-in-law's insurance office now, selling policies instead of managing portfolios, which feels to me like a fitting kind of demotion, though I take no particular joy in it. I take only the plain satisfaction of a case closed correctly. Vanessa and Derek separated for 4 months. I want to be honest and tell you I don't know everything that happened in their marriage during that stretch, because I made a deliberate choice to stay out of it, the same way a good court reporter never inserts her own opinion into another person's testimony. What I do know is they are back together now, in counseling twice a month, and Vanessa asked to meet with me alone about 2 months ago, over coffee, no children, no Derek, just the two of us at a diner near my house. She apologized. I want to tell you plainly that it did not sound rehearsed, and I have heard enough rehearsed apologies from enough witnesses trying to soften a verdict to know the difference. She told me her brother had made the whole plan sound so procedural, so far removed from anything that would actually touch me directly, that she'd let herself believe it wasn't really stealing, just restructuring, a word Chase apparently used more than once. She said she understood now, sitting across from me in that diner, that restructuring a trust behind the back of the woman who built it with her husband is exactly the same thing as stealing, dressed up in a nicer font. I told her I appreciated the apology, and I meant it, and I also told her that appreciation and restored trust are two entirely different things, and that the second one would take a great deal longer than a cup of coffee to rebuild, if it can be rebuilt at all. She said she understood that too. We'll see. The trust itself has been fully secured. Howard drew up new documentation, notarized and witnessed, permanently barring any future co-trustee arrangement without a court order, and adding a provision, at my specific request, that any attempt by anyone, family or otherwise, to submit fraudulent instructions to Heartland Fiduciary regarding that account triggers an automatic freeze and immediate notification to both Howard and myself. Eleanor helped design that safeguard herself, and she told me, kindly, that in 6 years of managing fiduciary accounts, she'd never once seen a trustee build a defense this thorough after the fact, only ever before. I told her that after the fact was simply when I happened to find out, and that thoroughness doesn't come with a deadline. Lily is 9 now, and Owen is 6, and neither of them know a single detail of any of this, and they never will hear it from me. They know their grandmother loves them completely, that she keeps their pajamas in a basket for sleepovers, and that someday, when they're old enough for it to matter, there will be money set aside for their school and their start in life, protected exactly the way their grandfather intended, untouched by anyone's hand but the one he chose. I still see Derek every week. Dinner most Sundays, though the pot roast tastes a little different to both of us now, and probably always will. He is, I believe, genuinely trying, in the small daily ways that matter more than any single grand gesture, showing up on time, calling before he stops by, never once asking a question about the trust again in any conversation we've had since that night. Trust, once broken this specifically, doesn't come back all at once. It comes back the way Walter used to build a cabinet, one careful joint at a time, checked twice before it's ever trusted to hold weight. Marion still calls every Sunday, same as always, though now our calls sometimes include a quiet update on how Derek's counseling is going, or how Priya's new safeguards at the bank are holding up, small check-ins between two women who have spent their whole professional lives making sure the record stays accurate. She told me once, a few weeks after the dinner, that in 31 years of probate court she had seen dozens of families destroyed by exactly the kind of scheme Chase Cole tried to run, and that the difference in my case wasn't luck. It was preparation. Most people, she said, don't find out until the money is already gone and the paperwork is already filed and a judge is already asking whether mother really did seem a little different last spring. I found out first because I never stopped listening the way my job taught me to listen, even after I no longer had a courtroom to listen in. Ruth Calloway and I still meet for coffee every few months, not for work anymore, just because the woman who helped me build a 41-page case out of 18 months of small suspicious moments has become, unexpectedly, one of my closest friends. She tells me sometimes about other families she's helping now, other quiet grandmothers who noticed a stove comment or a strange question about paperwork and didn't know yet whether it meant anything. I always tell her the same thing I'd tell any of you watching. It almost never means nothing. Write it down anyway. I retired from the courthouse 4 years ago, but I never stopped being a court reporter in the ways that matter most. I still notice the flicker before the composed face. I still catch the whisper that carries further than the speaker ever intends. I still believe, the way I believed through 34 years of testimony, that the truth doesn't need you to raise your voice for it. It just needs you to write it down exactly as it